I'm going to kind of like let the panelists set the stage for you. They're going to tell you just a little bit about what they do and what their company does and how it kind of relates to this topic of keeping up with the rapid pace of change in technology. So Barry, do you want to start?
Good morning, Barry McLaren with Ericsson. So Ericsson's been very vocal about our vision of a network society. You've seen a lot of material on that over the last few years. We're now working very hard to make that a reality. So Ericsson is an enabler in this space. Small cells are a very important aspect of the network society. I think the panel that we had previously outlined a lot of the issues and what can be connected. But there are a lot of realities, and we're working through these realities with our operator customers to really understand where the money can be spent most effectively in the short term. So identifying which buildings you should spend your money on and why, which solutions should be deployed. So Ericsson has an interest in this on the hardware side, so we can talk more about how technology is evolving, how we're supporting that technology from an R&D standpoint, and then also from services. How do we make these deployments faster? How do we make the business case work so that more of the buildings can be addressed with these solutions, and obviously the same in the outdoor space. So very excited to be a part of this discussion and appreciate your time.
John, go ahead.
As Sue said, I'm John Bramfeld, sales engineering at Advanced RF Technologies. We are a DAS OEM. We also manufacture kind of a suite of passive components and repeaters, but in this room it's likely we're most well known for the ADX fiber DAS. We're a fairly engineering-centric company, so I spend my time split between working with integrators and operators in the field on DAS, and then with our internal groups on disseminating market trends and continuing to adapt the DAS products.
Asad.
Thank you, Sue. My name is Asad Vaince with Boingo Wireless. Many of you guys know us as the Wi-Fi hotspot in the airports, but we're more than that. We have a growing DAS business, small cells business, that we're concentrating and focusing on. We feel between the two of Wi-Fi and DAS, it's really going to engage the user for a positive experience, but also represent the venue in a positive way. Ultimately, our goal is to connect many users as possible on the behalf of a venue and ensure that it's a positive experience through data speeds and Facebook posts and Snapchat and all the trendy stuff that's going on right now. So that's primarily our focus.
Great. Mark?
Yes, hi, I'm Mark Reynolds, the Associate Director at the University of New Mexico. I've been in telecommunications for 41 years, higher education for 31 years, and I'm over all of the carrier solutions at the university for all the macros. I take care of all of the lease payments, and I'm here really as a consumer perspective of what we are challenged with at higher education in order to provide these 6 and 7 devices that the students bring on an average. We're an 800-acre university, and on the average we have about 50,000 people that come on the campus on a daily basis. So the challenges that we have is looking at lease payments, self-pay, third-party or operator pay. So we're in that quandary right now of what to do. So I'm here to answer any questions you have about higher education.
Great. Jeff?
I'm Jeff Funderburg with AT&T's Antenna Solutions Group. It's a part of the company that was organized and established to support delivering in-building wireless in stadiums and arenas initially, and that's continued to evolve as demand has increased in the commercial and multi-dwelling unit space. We also are involved in development of outdoor DAS systems as well as in building, and I'm really thrilled to be here today to participate in this conversation.
Okay, great. Well, let's start off with, we've got the tier 1 operators, and by that I mean Sprint and T-Mobile and AT&T and Verizon. They're all in various stages of deploying LTE. Many are even starting to deploy LTE Advanced, which includes some capabilities like carrier aggregation and things like that. How does this latest upgrade that the carriers are doing, how does that impact you? Does it impact you? And that's one area of change. I mean, that, you know, we've got carriers at different stages of the game. I mean, how does that impact what you do? Barry, I know Ericsson's pretty involved in all of that as well.
Yes, obviously we're very involved from a hardware standpoint and from the services standpoint. I think the deployment of these LTE systems, you know, now we're at a stage where it's getting, you know, good coverage, and now moving into a lot of capacity additions. I think that's where small cells play the biggest role. I think in terms of how Ericsson is involved, we want to, you know, fill in all the gaps that are still out there, and small cells play a big role in doing that. I think one example is just my day yesterday, going from my home to the airport, to another airport, you know, on the train here, on a bus, into the hotel, and trying to conduct business throughout that. So that's kind of a microcosm of, you know, Ericsson wants to support from a hardware and services standpoint to make that more seamless, to be able to do screen sharing on the train and conduct a conference call as you come into the city of Chicago, for example. So it's going to advance very quickly. I think LTE Advanced provides a lot of additional features, and we'd like to see these features be able to work from small cells and a macro standpoint to have that seamless coordination, so you can take advantage of these features both indoors and out and have seamless mobility between the two.
John, so with their operator upgrades, are you having to then change your DAS systems to?
Yes, certainly. So, you know, LTE is relatively fully deployed now, and we see future releases. I think release 12 took us up to MIMO scenarios that are something like 4x4 up and 8x8 down. Carrier aggregation, a lot of spectrum flexibility, some allowances for unlicensed spectrum. All of this is very relevant to how we develop our products. You know, the DAS system that we work on, we look at a number of different things when we're developing it. Frequency, technology, and then the design methodologies that are going to have to be utilized to simulate what's happening in the macro. And, you know, frequency is kind of a dry topic, but it's something that is we have to constantly keep pace with it. Not only are there auctions down the line, but we see BRS being deployed, we see WCS being deployed. AWS is an old topic at this point. 600 is coming. All of these things are things we have to prepare for. And above and beyond that, the technologies can change. So, you know, with Sprint, we see TDD. That is something that requires some special care in a DAS. And we have to develop something very specific to address that. And we have to develop it in such a way that it will work with existing systems.
And it's always got to be backwards compatible, right? Is that what you mean, too?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to, I'm going to try and read Jeff's mind just based on practical experience, but Jeff probably does not care to balance his interests with the interests of Verizon. When he is deploying, he wants the performance of his piece of the network to do exactly what he wants, irregardless of whether or not Sprint has decided to hop on a DAS system, or AT&T has decided that they're going to deploy AWS. That should not impact AT&T, and vice versa. And that's something that we have to pay a lot of attention to. And TDD is a great example of that. And then there's just sort of keeping pace with the future design methodologies. I mean, we see things like on the horizon where user devices are going to be connected to separate points in the network simultaneously. You know, presumably an uplink and a downlink that are, you know, uplink would be to the small cell mesh underlay, and your downlink is coming from the macro. Simulating that in an internal environment is going to be very different than it's being simulated now. That is not a dynamic that is really happening outside of just basic 2x2 MIMO in an in-building system. And these are all challenges that kind of funnel back to how do we make sure that the product moving forward operates well, but make sure that the product that's already out there that our name is on is consistently supported and can be retrofitted.
So yeah, with your multiple, your addressing all these different operators, you have to stay on top of everything they're doing. So I'm going to jump down the table to Jeff. Jeff, is that right? You don't care about Verizon, you just...
We care about everyone in
You
this
care about
space,
everyone?
to some degree or another, anyway. But the thing that's exciting for carriers about LTE and LTE Advanced is the ability that it provides for us to leverage our spectrum investments. For example, here in Chicago, we are currently operating under the AWS and 700 megahertz license, and AWS or LTE Advanced gives us the ability to do some version of bonding of those carriers, and that allows us to provide our services much more efficiently than we've been able to do with other technologies.
So because you're using AWS here in addition to 700 megahertz, you can get more flexibility than maybe in other markets where that doesn't happen.
Absolutely. We literally are able to carry traffic over both through a single platform. So
Yeah, that makes
it works
sense.
out.
Asad, back to you now. Boingo, I mean, you do a lot of Wi-Fi offloading, right, for the operators? So when they move to a different technology, what does that mean for you? Anything?
Well, it means that we have to put more investment in our DAS networks to support those technologies. We see that through upgrades. We see that through designing advanced networks to support the future roadmap of carriers. We do feel that Wi-Fi is going to be an important asset in offloading. It is another medium to connect users. What we're doing is we've launched Passpoint in about 20 airports in North America, 26 including Brazil. And what that allows for us is it essentially builds an intelligence layer on our Wi-Fi that allows carriers to offload their traffic in a strategic manner. Essentially, you're building policies that the carriers can invoke, such as peak time data. So if the carrier wants to push X amount of users to Wi-Fi during peak times, we have the intelligent application layer to allow them to do that. So really working with the carriers to help, giving them another tool, giving them another highway essentially to meet the growing capacity needs. Even though carriers are investing a lot in LTE deployments, we do feel in concentrated areas such as stadiums, arenas, that Wi-Fi is very critical in helping them achieve a positive user experience. So we feel Wi-Fi can coexist with LTE. In fact, I believe that's a strong bond right there that can deliver a lot of capacity. And we feel that partnering with carriers through roaming agreements is going to be essential to the network.
I think I've read different statistics recently about how much of the carrier traffic is actually on Wi-Fi at certain times. It's high, 70% sometimes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing about Wi-Fi is that it doesn't matter what carrier the user subscribed with. Every device
Every
is
single
Wi-Fi
one of them.
capable. So that's the common denominator, which is an advantage. And you're seeing a lot of consumer behavior because of data plans. You have the 10 megabytes or 10 gigabyte data plans. So users are actively searching for Wi-Fi to kind of give themselves relief from their own plans. So I think it's...
Now, Mark, you have a kind of an interesting situation because you've got all these different operators upgrading, but as a campus environment, that presents some challenges.
It does, because the assumption is as you move to where you want ubiquitous from cellular to Wi-Fi, we have the challenge of just upgrading to N, let alone AC, let alone look at hotspots where we can translate from carrier to the Wi-Fi. So our funding models just don't keep up with what the carriers would like the universities to do in order to offload that backhaul data.
Okay.
And from an IT perspective, we really don't want the carriers to use our Wi-Fi. So an example is we had a DAS solution installed at the football and basketball arena, and athletics assumed that once that was stood up, that all of their issues with using their handheld scanners for ticket taking was going to go away, because everyone was going to migrate to the cellular connection with the anchor tenant, and that there would not be any more issues. But what was not talked about was that we have to turn off guest access in order to make that work. And so there was a real big disconnect between what And yes, the user experience for the anchor tenant was great, but the cellular coverage didn't change. So we do have that problem of, yes, that's where carriers want to go, the tier one operators want to move to, but the universities don't really have the bandwidth, pun intended, on both aspects of resources or revenue to make that happen and it be ubiquitous. So understanding where the tier one operators are moving, what your roadmaps are for LTE, LTE Advanced, 5G, et cetera, is important for higher education so that we can, when we get people standing up BDAs on their own or whatever they do, even with a carrier-dependent pico or microcell, we have to stay in step with the carrier so that we can design this accordingly and provide the best solution possible between the two mixes of LTE and Wi-Fi.
Are you finding that, I mean, do they reach out to you, or is there, no?
No.
Is there any sort
Matter of fact, I reached out to two of the tier one carriers this past week and asked if I could actually understand their roadmap, and both carriers were very hands-off, wanting to know why I was asking that question, because they do have a lot of NDA things that they don't want to get out on the street, and I respect that. But I made sure they understood it was from the university's perspective of what we want to learn, what they're doing for the university as a whole. Now, they do cover non-university customers, but it is important for me to understand as I look at DAS or letting more macros or more small cells to be stood up, what is the roadmap for those carriers, because then I can offset the things that I'm designing, whether it's with a third party or for the university itself, for the healthcare, because I do take care of healthcare, the health sciences, the university, athletics, and branch campuses. So it's very key that we do partner. So if you're listening, what I'm saying is reach out to your respective customers, at least the larger ones, the enterprise ones, and give them a heads up of where you're going.
Well, you can officially
There we
reach
go.
out to
Well, it's interesting because we know that millennials are such big users of wireless technologies, and with people on college campuses, if they're going to get a bad experience, that's, yeah. So it seems like it's important for the operators to be more cognizant of what's going on campuses.
Yeah, and I didn't get to say about ACUDA. I am the president of ACUDA, so if you go to acuda.org, you'll see there's a lot of universities that, and we just did a new tagline, so I got to make sure I say it right. Association for College and University Technology Advancement. So we're not EDUCAUSE, we're not as large as EDUCAUSE, but we're a very key group that works with everything in IT. We started out as voice, but we're a hybrid now, and one of the key things that we talk about are DAS and how it affects higher education. So if you don't know of ACUDA, please go look us up, and we're more than happy to work as we do with HetNet. Tracy has going to do some presentations at our annual and our winter conference, so thank you.
So we've talked a lot about LTE and LTE Advanced. You know, already in my world, we're talking about 5G. What is it? And there's a lot of descriptions and theories about it. There's a timeline out there that says, oh yeah, we'll have 5G by 2020. So that's not really all that far away. So my question for the panelists is, what do you kind of envision 5G to be, and when do you think we will realistically see it? And I'm going to start with Barry, since he's with the vendor and Ericsson's pretty involved in 5G.
So we're looking at 5G. We're working in labs as we speak on 5G. We've done an over-the-air demonstration of 5G. So it's still being defined. There's a roadmap that's been very, very well defined in some areas and still evolving in other areas. I think it's really a case of being able to connect all the things that we envision that haven't been connected yet that the previous panel talked about. I think also the bandwidth is one concern. I think backhaul needs to be considered. I think you talk about 5G, we talk a lot about the access, and you get a lot of excitement on that side, but we have some realities on the backhaul front, how you're going to be able to support that type of performance. I think security will be a big part of 5G in terms of mission-critical data, and what mission-critical data is very different in different use cases for a financial institution versus a university versus a hospital. So where do you want your data to be? You know, I mean, bringing it home, we talked about kids in the previous panel. If you're controlling your front door, right, for someone to come into the home or for your child to come into the home, and we have this 5G and we have everything connected and the fridge is connected, but what's really mission critical and where should that data be transported? So that's something that we're spending a lot of time focusing on today. But I think it's exciting. I think it can go a lot of different ways, and it enables things that we've thought about and some things that we haven't thought about yet, and we're working hard to define those.
John, what do you hear and what do you think about 5G?
Well, I think, you know, right now we're sort of forming opinions about something which is lacking a lot of definition. And it's a little bit difficult to do that. I think in the absence of that real clear definition that, you know, guys like Barry are working on right now, it boils down to sort of a series of real basic and not wholly useful, but basic metrics about speed and capacity and latency and what the network will support. You know, there's, you know, it's kind of flashy to talk about being able to download a movie in 1 second, which is something that's been repeated an awful lot. But I think the bigger challenges are going to come from the Internet of Things and the capacity of the network, you know, by 100 and 1,000 multiples. I think that the networks are going to be extraordinarily dense. I mean, that's something that DAS plays a fundamental role in the densification of the networks. And I think there's not going to be a 5G moment. 4G was really kind of married to LTE. LTE was rolled out, and, you know, right or wrong, that was 4G. And, you know, every network, every operator had their 4G moment. 5G, I think, is going to be muddled away a little bit. I'm sure marketing will get a hold of it at some point, but it's going to be a lot of incremental steps and not giant leaps forward. And I think that a result of that is that the operators may end up in very different places, and their version of 5G may not look like their competitor or another MNO on the other side of the ocean. I think 5G is going to be a series of capabilities, and which ones are adopted is going to be very much customer based.
That's interesting. So, yeah, it will be interesting to see, because if the marketing, I think marketing sometimes moves things a lot differently than standards and that's what we saw at least with 4G, right? Asad, what does 5G mean to Boingo?
Well, it's amazing that we're already talking about the 5th generation of you know, wireless. Ultimately, for us, our view is that we want to have the infrastructure to support it. What that means, particularly in terms of standards, is unclear. However, I suspect it's going to be revolved around data speeds north of 100 megabytes, and particularly uplink data speeds north of 50 megabytes. And we're already seeing that capability with spectrum that the carriers are concatenating 10, 15, 20, 30 megahertz. FCC is releasing new spectrum, which can ultimately make it possible. So what that means for us is working with the carriers, developing a roadmap to ensure that we have the infrastructure in place to support those technologies as they come to market.
Mark, you're saying that, you know, you're already trying to work with operators on just roadmaps for 4G. I mean, 5G, that seems like even a bigger jump for you.
It is, and something that, you know, when the carriers went from 2G, 3G, then to 4G, we started to see a lot of momentum in getting the backhaul connections to the macros, and so that's where you get into the discussion of how do you get to that macro for these carriers. And a lot of times they traverse university property and they can't physically get there from a CLEC, whether it's TW, CenturyLink, or whatever. And so the challenge is that even just that of getting fiber connectivity to that macro is something that a lot of carriers don't consider when you go into a location where you do have a macro. Two of the things that we have to be involved in order to provide the connectivity and the services that you need, whether you're standing up a small cell or whatever you're doing, so we can partner with you to provide that services. So that's important.
Right. So I'm hearing backhaul is, yes, a growing concern when we talk about these higher speeds and these bigger, lots of bandwidth, more and more devices connected. How are we going to handle that? And spectrum availability, I think, is another issue. It's where our operators going to get the spectrum to deploy 5G. Jeff, I know AT&T is pretty involved in kind of working with other operators on the 5G roadmap and the 5G standards. So what is AT&T sort of envisioning?
Well, it's one of the most exciting prospects that we have in the industry today, and it very frankly is being a bit modest about the success of some of their trials. The preliminary reports I've seen have already said that they're exceeding LTE speeds by 200 to 250 times in these proof of concept trials. So what that means to the carriers and people in the business of providing services on those platforms is that we now have the ability to leverage even more the businesses that we're developing today, like Digital Life, where you will literally be able to help you fully connect your home,
Right.
and the appliances in it. Connected cars is another area that AT&T is investing in heavily. With the speeds that LTE, the speeds that 5G provides, we will literally be able to see latency reduced to just a few milliseconds. So that fast ability to switch between devices and have devices interact with one another at that speed means that now cars can literally drive themselves. And I think that the backbone of 5G will allow us just a number of opportunities well beyond what we can even imagine today.
If I could just add quickly, I think it's definitely about the speed, but it's also the guarantee that you have access to that speed. So you talk about connected cars, for example, you have to have that latency, you have to have that availability and capacity guaranteed, right? As we all know, driving around, there's not a lot of margin for error. So I think, 5G can take us to those guarantees that will enable some of the things on a broader scale that are working right now in trials and in concept, but to actually become reality, that aspect of guaranteed performance, I think, will be critical for all the operators and all the end users.
Now, John, I'm going to jump to you because the last panel talked a lot about, one of the last questions on the last panel was, what keeps you up at night, and a few of the members talked about the complication of kind of the industry and how these are complicated systems and it's hard to get it all integrated. Is 5G going to be better, or do you think that some of the complications that the earlier panel talked about, is that going to go away at any point? You deal with so many different customers and the operators. Do you think the ecosystem's getting any better?
Better in terms of greater simplicity or?
Simpler.
Simpler? No, certainly not.
And 5G is not going to make it better?
No, I anticipate 5G will be, it will track right along as things currently are right now, and that is greater and greater complexity. I think, one of the things that, keeps me up at night is the adoption of new frequency, adoption of new technology, and there being greater and greater disparity among the major operators in terms of what sorts of technologies and frequencies they're going to be using. And as those disparities grow, the systems that are designed to operate as a converged network, a DAS, where all can play, it forces that DAS in a position of doing some very extraordinary things. And, we will keep up as we have, but I'm not anticipating things becoming simpler.
Jeff, also on AT&T side, it seems like managing the network, managing all these different, the task of the network engineer, I guess, used to be much simpler, I would guess, than it is today. Is that, how do we balance all those different systems, the different spectrum, you know, all the different devices? I mean, it's a pretty complicated job, isn't it?
It certainly is, and the challenges of old have been simplified through IT development and really the creation of modeling tools that previously we didn't have available to us. I think that the engineering will get a little bit simpler as we collaborate more with our brethren on the IT side. So that convergence of telecom and IT, those two worlds,
That's a
will
good point.
actually simplify things from an operations perspective. In addition to that, network function virtualization, basically software-defined networks, will also make the human resource component a less strained component of managing the business than it's been in the past.
So the adding the software to the network is going to make it easier to manage? Is
Actually,
make the software be smarter than all the human element? Is that it?
no, it'll just simplify it.
Simplify.
It won't be smarter, but
Okay.
it'll simplify the process of managing. And frankly, we're going from an environment where we've had huge switches and wires and fibers managing our traffic to one where software will handle a lot of the intelligence. So we're literally going from 5E switches to servers.
Now, Asad, I wanted to talk to you about Wi-Fi, because there's also been some pretty big inroads in Wi-Fi networks. Hotspot 2.0 technology has kind of enabled roaming between Wi-Fi networks and cellular networks. You know, how has that kind of helped your business, and what about, and tell us a little bit more about PassPoint.
Sure. So, to give you the general gist of PassPoint, essentially what it does is it creates more capacity, higher data speeds. How we do that is upgrades in our infrastructure on the back end, but also building that intelligence layer that allows for essentially seamless roaming to the user. So you kind of tackle the issue of authentication that comes with Wi-Fi. The other point would be that we're working with the carriers to provide them an avenue where they can control or better control traffic on their network by allowing for Wi-Fi offload. And that was the policy aspect that I was alluding to earlier. And what we do there is essentially we work with the carriers and ask them, what policies do you want in place? You know, what are your peak hours? Do you want to cap it at X amount of users, or do you want to cap it at X amount of megabytes? So allowing that flexibility to the carrier and allowing them to push traffic and pull traffic from the Wi-Fi network, having that intelligence layer coupled with the roaming capability and the higher data speeds is essentially what defines.
So that authentication process that people talk is about being such sort of a holdup. Ian talked about it being sort of a deterrent from, that's going to get better, that's going to be less cumbersome.
That's correct. I think all of us here have experience with Wi-Fi and you know, logging on to a network or authenticating to a network, and then you go to another access point, for example, and you get kicked off, you have to re-authenticate. That whole process is annoying to the user, and we look to tackle that by handling that in the roaming infrastructure that we have in the back end to kind of make it seamless to the user. So the user just sees that they're connected and they're texting away, they're downloading away, and they're completely unaware of what's going on the back end in terms of the roaming aspects. I do believe that's going to be the most noticeable improvement, along with data speeds, of course.
Mark, your thoughts on these advances in the Wi-Fi area? I mean, is that promising from your point of view, the Hotspot 2.0 and the easier authentication and some of those?
Well, to me it is, because I'm over the voice communications, but to the associate director over IT data, it's not. When I asked him this question, I begged the question of, you know, what about Hotspot 2.0 for the future? And he's like, well, and he wrote me a little thesis saying, we get 18,000 hits on the wireless per day. We have 100,000 IP connections that we work on wired. So to the to you as the cellular companies, as a community, we're really like a big venue to you. But to us, we're a city within a city. So I have 20,000 phone lines, we have 100,000 IP connections, 26,000 students, 50,000 people on the campus at one time. But because we have, as the carriers cater to the millenniums and the baby boomers are starting to exit, including myself over the next few years, how is that technology going to change and the funding models to help the university stay up with that? Because I'm a cost center and I provide dial tone at a cost to a user, as cellular speeds get better and ubiquitous coverage, I'm going to lose those customers because they're going to say, why should I pay you X per month when I'm already paying a charge here and I have a data plan that is ultimately up to so much for free? Why would I do that? So it's kind of a catch-22 for us. Until we figure out how to change our funding model and people continually use these and embrace these, it's going to be a challenge for us to balance between the two of having that ubiquitous coverage, which increases bandwidth, which increases usage, which then they're going to drop their phones, which they're already doing. People are dropping them and saying, I'm not paying for both, I'm just going to use this. So going back to the Wi-Fi specific question, I think it's valuable to have that handoff, to have that ubiquity from the IT networks until we figure out a better funding model to change our technology or add technology to augment the cellular coverage. That's going to be a challenge for us.
Well, I've kind of dominated the panel with my questions. Do we have some questions from the audience? We've got a microphone. Just raise your hand. Nobody? I can keep going. I'll keep checking, but I'll ask another one. So there's been some talk lately about, since we were on the topic of Wi-Fi and advances in Wi-Fi, is that going to minimize the need for small cells? And do you think of small cells versus Wi-Fi? Is one going to win over the other? John, I'm going to start with you, as you deal with those technologies. So
I would suspect that the interplay between small cells and Wi-Fi is not unlike the interplay between DAS and Wi-Fi, with the only exception that, does Ericsson just release the small cell that has Wi-Fi, does it not?
Yeah, we have several small cell products with integrated Wi-Fi, so we see it complementing each other and working together.
Okay, so it's exactly the same. I mean, that's essentially the
So you think
trajectory we've seen.
small cells will just incorporate Wi-Fi as opposed to being displaced by Wi-Fi?
I think so. I mean, there was, some T-Mobile press over the past few weeks generated a lot of discussion about, did Wi-Fi just kill DAS because they can make a Wi-Fi call? And I think the answer is really no. The availability of Wi-Fi really didn't impact the deployment of data services over licensed spectrum in building deployments very much, and it's hard to believe that it would impact voice either. And the reality is that rather than competing over the product, which in this case are the subscribers, really it's going to be a mutually beneficial relationship. Both will be deployed together, and there's actually quite a bit of synergy between the two.
Barry, I mean, I know you sort of already answered the question, but Ericsson didn't initially include Wi-Fi in their small cell, right? The first version wasn't. So why was there the delay? Was Wi-Fi something that you had to put in because of customer demand, or?
Yeah, just a product roadmap evolution. We've supported Wi-Fi, throughout. We acquired Bel Air, so we've been involved in Wi-Fi. So we see the two working together. I think an important clarification on the voice over Wi-Fi is voice over Wi-Fi in the home, in a residential environment, versus in an enterprise, in a commercial setting. So if you have your own access point at home, that may be a good substitution for somewhere that you don't have the ability to make a voice call. consistently in the home, but in the enterprise and public spaces where you can get congestion with the Wi-Fi, that's where we feel that voice over LTE will take precedence most likely. But there's definitely a place for Wi-Fi, and the amount of data and all these hockey stick graphs that we're all very familiar with, we're going to have to leverage all these different technologies to handle that capacity and divide what's mission critical versus non-mission critical. So YouTube versus enterprise applications running over LTE.
And since you brought up voice over LTE, I think I'll go to my question about voice over LTE. It's become available. I mean, Jeff, I believe AT&T has launched in some limited markets. We've seen T-Mobile and Verizon also launch, but there's also a limited number of handsets at this point. So, what does that migration look like from circuit switched voice to voice over LTE for AT&T? I mean, how big of a move is that?
Well, it's really part of a longer-term process for our network's evolution. I mentioned earlier the network function virtualization and developing this IP core and being able to leverage that with 5G. Well, this voice over LTE plays part in because it's IP. It's basically a VoIP app running through LTE. So the thought is that as devices develop and are rolled out in 2015, it should be seamless. It should be painless for our users and the network.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have thoughts on voice over LTE and what that means? I mean, John, do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, from the perspective of a DAS OEM, voice over LTE is not something that we have to tamper with too much. Not speaking for the other OEMs, but for us, the idea is that, while a DAS is, extremely accessible and controllable and visible to the operator, it's invisible to everyone else. And we don't like to do a lot with the operator's signal. We don't do any encoding or decoding, and if Jeff is putting voice over LTE through his network, we're going to pass that through, and we do things to minimize noise and minimize latency and make sure that it's a very optimal path, but we're relatively hands-off. We don't we let the carriers do what they want with that.
And Asad, with like T-Mobile's announcement of the voice over Wi-Fi calling, I mean, do you think you'll see traffic like that on Boingo, or do you already see that? And
Absolutely.
And how? But there is sort of a quality issue, right? You can.
Yeah, anyone who's used voice over IP, whether it's in your office, Skype, Vonage, there's always issues in terms of delays and things like that. The margin of error is very slim when you're dealing with voice over IP. I think the challenge is going to be in a DAS, launching voice over LTE in a DAS environment is the location aspect of it, right? I think most of the challenge lies on the carriers and their core network, but from a 911 perspective, I think that's going to be
That's a good point.
That's going to be the speed bump. Is how are you going to locate your user within your venue, so you can triangulate their location and pass it back to the E911 layer. That has yet to be determined. How are we going to do that? It might be using Wi-Fi actually to.
So the
locate an
E911
individual.
requirements for voice over LTE haven't really been set. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm sure they've been set. Jeff can probably speak more to it than I can. But in a
Yeah, 'cause
DAS
I think
environment,
they've talked about it, but I don't know. Okay, but from a DAS point of view, it isn't clear.
it's unclear to have that level of granularity in terms of locating a user. Is still unclear on how we're going to approach that. The technology doesn't exist within the DAS system to support that today.
It doesn't. Okay, that seems like kind of a significant challenge to still be worked out. Questions yet? Anybody? Okay, we got one. Thank you.
More issues related to network elements and within
know, to be perfectly frank, I think that there's a balance between the two. So our processes are evolving every day. We've got a program management office that daily are working on new ways to be more efficient in how we do business. I hesitate to say, but I think I can share this. One of the things that we want to accomplish is be faster at delivering the services, things like bandwidth on demand. Today, and I'm sure most of us in this room have experienced provisioning or ordering a service and it taking weeks and months in some cases. The goal and one of the internal objectives of the network operations organization today is to cut that cycle time down to days or hours. And so there's a major effort between the engineering organization, our program management teams, as well as our IT organizations, because as mentioned earlier, that's where the rubber is really going to meet the road, in the systems that we use to run our business being more efficient and easier for the resources that manage them. So I think that it's fair to say that we see both. We certainly, with the demand in the wireless space and just the mobile data traffic that we carry today, we are always pressing the envelope on our infrastructure capacity and capabilities. But ultimately, they're both balls that we have to keep our eye on. Does that answer? Thank you. Absolutely.
Anybody else? Here's a question over here. Thanks, Tracy. Yeah.
I can take that one. No, absolutely, we are seeing congestion. We see that because we're moving more towards a free access model. We're moving away from a subscriber model. And as a result, you're inviting more traffic onto your network. We do use both bands, the 5 gigahertz and the 2.4 gigahertz. How we're tackling that issue is through Hotspot 2.0, investing in our infrastructure, upgrading our backhaul to handle that capacity.
It's spot on. What's happening is exactly what you'd expect, right? We've come up with a plan, a rate plan that seems to have gotten quite a bit of visibility. Our competitors did the same, and frankly, both networks are seeing increased data traffic as a result. And in addition, when you look at the second part of your question, regarding our capacity and capability of supporting the demand. When we look at going from, at least based on what studies are saying, going from a little bit more than half an exabit of traffic to almost 3 in the next few years, that's a difficult concept to even digest. So we're looking very closely at that, and I know for me personally, I get lost at about 1 gig, kilobits, megabits. When you get to terabits, petabits, and the rest, it literally is Greek to me. So I did some research to try and figure out exactly how much data this is as part of my strategy role for in-building. And 1 exabit of data is the equivalent of 250 million DVDs, movie DVDs. And when we look at going from a little more than half of that being carried on North American wireless networks today to 5 times that, that presents a real challenge, especially for the in-building space where 80% of the traffic, I think that's a generally accepted stat now, but 80% of this mobile data traffic is being originated or generated from in-building. So when you ask whether we've got capacity to support the data plans and the projected growth, the answer is no. We absolutely are not there, and everyone is rushing to get there as quickly as we possibly can. So these advances in the technology, LTE Advanced, and the concept of 5G, all of these science and technology-based advances where we're pushing the laws of physics on the infrastructure only help us meet that demand. And I'll close out with saying that I think that the absolute most amazing thing about our business is the demand that's generated as a result of the creativity of the end user and developers on the edges, the people who are developing the apps and creating the capability for people to be entertained even by these devices that used to be just telephones. So hopefully that answers your question there. Thank you.
Anybody else want to talk about that? Is it time for me to wrap? I think it's time for me to wrap, but thank you very much for coming today. Thank you to my panelists.